Hey, this is Matt Cox, and today's video I'm going to talk about what prior to me going to prison when I first started committing fraud, and it, I'm not sure I'm not really going to talk about when I committed a mortgage fraud as much as what I committed basically kind of like credit card fraud, and kind of how that developed, and and essentially what happened, kind of how I went through the process. But before we get to all that, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, like the video, and share it with your friends, and leave a comment for the algorithm. So I was a mortgage broker. How old was I? Well, I started as a mortgage broker. I was probably 28, 29 years old. And God, things were not going well for me at all. I ended up working for, after college, I worked construction for a while, but then I got my insurance license, and I was an insurance adjuster for a while, and it was a horrible job, and I got laid off one time, and another time I ended up quitting one job. I got laid off from another job. But the truth is, it was just really monotonous, and it was a lot of paperwork. It was a lot of it was not the job for me. What ended up happening was I started working construction, and then I had a girlfriend that came to me, and she's told me that, look, you got to become a mortgage broker. She was working for a company that was a subprime lender, and they were doing well, or she was doing well, and so she was like, look, you've got to do this. You're great at this. So I did. I went and I applied for the job, and I flew out to North Carolina. I was trained for 2 or 3 days, and they flew me back, and I started at the mortgage company, and I did really well very quickly. And of course, I did very well very quickly because, like, the very first loan I did, I immediately started committing fraud. It was, I'm not going to get into exactly what happened or how it happened, but essentially the first loan I had, it was going to go under because of like one 30-day late. Like, I whited it out, and the next thing you know, the next guy that came in, he had an issue. I fixed his issue. Next thing, it just went on and on. And the entire industry was extremely, well, there was a lot of corruption going on. Didn't feel like it was that big of a deal. So ultimately, though, like, let's say a year or so later, I ended up owning my own mortgage company. I really honestly didn't want to own my own mortgage company. I just wanted to be a mortgage broker, but things kept happening that it just ended up, I ended up starting a company. I started a company with 4 or 5 guys, and I would say, and that mortgage company there was a lot of fraud involved in that mortgage company. One of the things that happened at that particular mortgage company was that I remember a woman came in one time. She had applied for a mortgage, and one of my brokers pulled her credit. And he came in, he showed me the credit. He said, look, the credit looks great, right? I was like, yeah, it looks great. She had like a car loan. She had a couple credit cards. And so it was like, it was great. It was like, okay, it's perfect. She had like, her credit scores were in the mid to high 700s, and she was perfect. She'd been at the same job for 4 or 5 years. Everything was perfect. But when he was putting together the package, he realized that her W-2s had a different social security number on them than he had pulled. And he was like, that's weird, right? I forget exactly how he caught that. But so he called her and asked her to come in, and she came in, and she came in my office. Like, he didn't want to have that conversation with her. He was like, I want her to get upset. So she came in my office and sat down. I said, look, we've got a discrepancy here. And she was super nervous. And I showed her I said, this is what we pulled, and this is what you provided, this is what you told my broker on the phone. But here's the W-2 you provided. So I showed her the W-2, and she was like, whoa, what's wrong with that? And I showed her the discrepancy, and she went, right. And I said, well, what happened? What's the issue? I was like, look, you can tell me. I don't care. I'm not calling the police. I just want to know how you have 2 social security numbers. And she was like, well, she had gotten a divorce, And when she told me, so what she said, look, when I got a divorce, I had all this credit in my married name. Her husband had run up all the credit cards and they got a divorce. This is, sorry, she probably knows. She said she got a divorce. They had a repo, they had an eviction, and she said that a friend of hers had told her that she should apply for her next property in her maiden name and use her son's social security number. And her son was like 1 year old or 2 years old. So she pulled her credit. She went to the apartment complex and used the son's social security number and her maiden name. And she'd been married for however many years. And because she didn't want to use she was being evicted and she didn't want to use that address. She was like living at her family's house at that point, like her parents' house. So she used the parents' address, she used her her kid's social security number, and she used her maiden name. So the only thing that was really the same with her was her first name, that there was a credit bureau attached, was the first name and the date of birth. Everything else was different. So obviously, her name was, let's say, Janet. There's probably tons of people with the first name Janet and that date of birth. So the credit bureau actually created an alternative credit profile for her. And so now, using her maiden name, which she had credit in, but it was 5 or 10 years earlier. So she pulled her credit using the new SOCH, her date of birth, and essentially her new name. And that created a new credit profile. So she got the apartment, and she said after she got the apartment, she applied to get several like car loans. And so the salesman, like, she didn't get them. Like the salesman was like, listen, you got to get some credit. You already get a secured credit card. So she went out and using her maiden name, her son's social security number, and the new address applied for secured credit cards, which of course she got. She got a few secured credit cards, and after she was like, and after several months, I went back and I applied and got a car loan from like Ford or somebody who at that time I would finance anybody. She made the car payment, she made the secured credit card payments, and then she said after a year or so, she said, I started getting offers from credit card companies that were offering unsecured credit cards. She goes, so I got my money back from the secured credit cards, and I opened up a couple unsecured credit cards here. And now I want to buy a house, and I came in and I applied for a mortgage from you guys, and you guys approved me. Only you approved me using my son's social security number. I just remember thinking, I should have been thinking that's horrible, but I remember thinking, wow, that's genius. That is amazing. She had completely created this synthetic identity. And you can imagine, it was easy for her to go out. She got a driver's license in the name, in her maiden name, her real name. She just switched back to her maiden name. So she's providing this number and and borrowing money using this alternative credit profile. So I was like, okay, that makes total sense. And she's like, well, I'm so sorry. Please don't call the police. And I was like, oh, what are you talking about? We're going to change your social security number on your W-2s. So we changed it on the W-2s, and the loan went through, and she got a loan. No problem. So, well, at that time, I was already, I had a couple of friends of mine that had gotten in trouble with the FBI, and I remember thinking it might lead to me. I should preface this by saying my mortgage brokerage business had the ability to pull credit. We pulled what's called a tri-merge. I mean, we could pull individual ones. We could pull like with Equifax or but we could also pull all three bureaus. So we would pull a tri-merge. I remember I went out and I grabbed the social security number. This is horrible. But I went to the file cabinet. I opened the file cabinet. I grabbed a bunch of 1040 forms, and there were people that were taking deductions for their children. Their children's numbers were there, and their social was there. So you got some 2-year-old kid, and I took the kid's social security number. I went and I pulled the credit, and I made up a name. It was Lee Black. So I made up the name Lee Black. So I made up the Lee Black and used some social security number that I pulled out of the file cabinet, put that on, put a date of birth that was like 7/7/1970, and I pulled it. And it came back, credit profile not found. Okay, that makes sense. There's no credit. But I decided to go ahead and credit card down. So I applied for some credit cards online, got denied, using, of course, the alternative search and name. So using Lee Black's information, I applied for several credit cards online. All got denied. But then I re-pulled the credit bureau. I went, it was a pain. You had to recontact who we were pulling from and tell them, look, I need to re-pull this. Can you wipe the credit so I can re-pull it? And they said, well, because typically if you re-pulled it within 30 days, they just give you the same report. So I went back and I re-pulled the credit, and they said, okay, we'll re-pull it. So they re-pulled the credit and gave it to me, and all the inquiries showed up. But what didn't show up was, it didn't say no record found. It now listed Lee Black's name, the social security number I'd given them, the date of birth I'd given them, the address I had given them. And I remember I used the address for what was called they used to be called mailboxes, etc. And I think that the UPS store bought them all out. I could be wrong, but somehow or another they're gone. And some of them are now UPS stores, where they have the mailboxes, the private mailboxes. So I used one of those, and so I got, but the other thing that showed up on the credit was all the inquiries. So now the name, date of birth, social security number, and address, and all the inquiries showed up. So I now knew I had created a completely synthetic identity. Well, my problem with that was this, that it's like, okay, so you've got the synthetic identity, and how do you utilize that? Well, what's funny is, I owned a mortgage company. At this point, I owned the mortgage company. There had to be 12 guys working for me. Probably 10 or 12 guys working for me at this point, because I'd started with very few, but by this point, we moved to a bigger office, and I had gotten more and more guys. The small company, the 4 guys ended up being like 6, and then 8, and then 10. It was like, okay, you got to get a bigger space. So I went and got a larger office space. I had like 12 guys working there. I actually had a couple guys working out of their houses, just because they didn't want to come in the office. They just wanted to pay a small cut. But how do you make money